So I see Gail is just about to connect and almost here. So we're just, hi Gail.
Hi.
So we're going to be about ready to begin. This is the September 23rd meeting of the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force. Quite a mouthful, that committee name. And it's 6:30 p.m. And I'm Mark Howell, and I'm going to do a call to order. We have today just a roll call. Gail Heyer.
Here.
Okay. David Hessel.
Here.
Gordon Brockway.
Here.
Scott Hopkinson.
Here.
And Scott's joining us by telephone today, so he's the green phone on my screen. And myself, Mark Howell. And just so that we can dispense with some of the meeting is being recorded. If you do not want to be recorded, you can either remain quiet or leave. And it's being held under the current provisions for the open meeting law. And we're proceeding with those guidelines. Our first step is we had indicated at our last meeting that we would do a rotating clerk assignment. And so I'm looking for one of the other members of the committee to volunteer to serve as clerk for today's meeting, just to get us started.
I would volunteer, but Gail did such a detailed amount. Do we need notes that are so detailed?
No, probably not.
Okay.
We'll do that, but I appreciate it, David. Just a reminder, I did go back and review our position on minutes. The ideal instance is to try to complete minutes by the next meeting. However, we know that this committee plans to meet weekly for a while, and that's a heavy lift. It is my intention to try to make sure that our draft minutes are published with our meeting agendas so that the public will have access to the minutes and we'll create a detailed record. We weren't quite able to accomplish that in the short window that we had, and the guidelines for open meeting suggest that as long as minutes are completed and published by the third meeting after the meeting takes place, that's well within the guidelines. So we had distributed Gail's draft to everyone. And my intention would be to first, hopefully everybody received those drafts. Has everybody had a chance to review it, or do we need to try to act on them next week?
No, I reviewed them.
Okay.
Great.
Gail, did you get any feedback, Gail, that you needed to?
No, just the email from you, Mark, which looked fine.
Yeah.
To me.
Okay. Scott, did you have any feedback on the minutes?
No feedback on the minutes.
Okay, and Gordon?
Yeah, I have one just steering clear of any complaints about compliance with open meeting law. It says here that Gordon reminded members that one-on-one communication is okay as long as decisions are not made. It's actually more stringent than that. It's okay as long as discussions are not formed.
Okay.
Which means that, like, you can't do offline or one-on-one conversations to canvass, and by canvass I mean count votes or survey committee opinions on things, or relay indirectly from one committee member to another committee member through a third member. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So so you can't form these discussion loops.
Mm-hmm.
So
Understood.
So I just changed that word decisions to discussions, and that may be sufficient, or you could reword that sentence to make as long as discussions do not take place.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. If you can make that change, I'd approve the minutes.
Okay.
Do
And
you want
just-
me to make the change? Is that how
Yes, please.
it usually works? Okay.
Right. And I had just added the word budget in between enterprise and book on the in a comment on page 4, where he suggested that the enterprise book is a useful tool and noted the policy. So I had inserted the word enterprise budget book just to be a little bit more clear there. And there was one other change which I don't have right in front of me, but maybe Gail does.
Yeah. It was same page. Mark noted, I had said that the task force role is about implementing policies and re-articulating the goals for broadband, and you suggested the role is about recommending policies to be implemented, which
Right.
makes more sense.
Yeah, that was according to our charge. So given those changes, what I would propose to do is I would take a motion to approve the minutes, and I would publish the approved minutes with next week's agenda so that they're available for people to review online. And we'll try to, see whether we can get them, if we can get them in time for that. Otherwise, we may be actually putting them up a little bit behind approval. But do I have a motion?
So moved.
Wait. So I move, is it, yeah, the chair can't make the motion. I'm sorry, would the motion be, I move to accept the minutes, approve the minutes? I move to approve the minutes with the corrections noted.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Scott,
Yes.
Gordon,
Yes,
David,
Yes.
Gail,
Yes.
and myself, Mark, I. Okay. So with that and the minutes in place and David agreeing to proceed as chair, we are up
As
against
clerk.
the conflict for Terry Ackerman, who needs to leave us to join the Finance Committee meeting, which is going to be starting in a couple of minutes. And I know that she wanted to make a couple of follow-up comments after our last meeting. So I would suggest that we hear from Terry right now.
Thank you, Mark. I'll be very brief. I don't have to leave right at 7, but probably pretty soon after that. I just want to apologize about the charge. You did receive the charge that the select board voted. However, when we all looked at it last time, it didn't seem to be exactly how we remembered it, any of us. So I really apologize. I don't know how that happened, but we've watched the tape. We've looked at the materials. That is the version we voted. So if this committee finds anything that you need changed, please do come back to the select board and we will, be happy to fix it and accommodate what you need to do. So that was all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Any questions, comments? Gordon?
yeah, just referring to the wireless clause, where it says in particular, the committee will not study or explore cellular telephone service solutions or internet access that's based on wireless technologies such as small cells, 5G, or over-the-air reception devices. I don't think that should be in there. I'm also not suggesting that we have to consider these, but I would like that changed. I'd feel more comfortable working on this project if we didn't have basically a conclusory, a conclusion baked in to the charge. And I think that it actually, I know that some of you are opposed to these technologies, Gail, and maybe others on the board. That's fine. I think that you'll actually benefit in the long run if you don't have that in there in the first place. I just, here's the thing is that one of the major solutions to the AMI rollout involves a wireless link. That just has to be, now that's for AMI, that's for the smart meters. There just could be instances where in order to economically accomplish what we're trying to do here, wireless needs to be considered. And you can't tell town meeting that that's not a good solution if you didn't consider it. It's better to have it in and knock it down than to rule it out before you even begin, because your message isn't going to be as believable. So I just think that even if you are opposed to wireless technology, you shouldn't have that clause in there.
So I feel that well, first of all, that sentence was in the charge that the select board reviewed, and I know they discussed it, and there was some additional language in there that they did take out. But I do feel that this is the sentiment of the people who brought Article 41 to town meeting, and I also feel that the fiber is a resource that everyone should have. And so I think our goal should be that everyone should have fiber, and that's the goal. That's some other communities across the US have done that or are doing that, and that's our goal. So I'm not comfortable with saying, oh yeah, we're also going to look at wireless. And maybe once we look at, can we get fiber to everyone, we might decide no, we can't, and then we might have to look at something else. We being the town, or not necessarily this committee. So that's how I feel about it. And I just do feel that we have so much work to do that adding that layer of, oh well, why don't we think about what we can do if we can't get fiber is too much for our charge. So that's my point of view on that.
Okay, and you said that the people that brought this charge to the light board, to the select board, are unanimous in their opposition to wireless technologies. But this was an action, a warrant of town meeting. And what the town agreed to did not have that language in it. Furthermore, before the select board reviewed that charge, they let the light board take a look at it. And that language wasn't in there then. If it had been, the light board would have spoken up about it before the select board considered it. So sliding that in after the fact is a shortcut, shortcutting the review that the light board had over it, shortcutting the sense of town meeting.
Well, I guess.
Well, I just want to clarify, that's not, no, I'm the one who took all the comments from the light board and Gail and her group and everybody was invited to comment, and nothing was slipped in like that. However, Gail is correct that there was more language in there, and the select board took out a lot of that language, and this is the only part that remains now. So if the majority of this committee wants us to take out that language and the charge, we can do that. Or if the majority of this committee does not want us to, then we won't.
I did want to point out that,
Go ahead, Gail, and then I'd like to hear from David and Scott.
yeah, thanks. Well, just,
Yeah, I'd like to speak too. Thank you.
thanks. I just wanted to say the meeting materials that were, part of the town meeting booklet. There was a one pager explaining, why, just, what the article is about and why we need it. The last sentence, last bullet point, why do we need to do it now? One of the things is competition. Commercial telecommunications interests are actively marketing other less sustainable and less desirable options, densely sited 5G antennas, over-the-air devices on homes and buildings, and subscription and installation fees paid to out-of-town businesses. So I don't think you can say that this is completely out of the blue. So that's my point.
Let me try to give you a perspective from Concord Green, because I met today with a site manager and an electrician to try to anticipate the broadband, CMLP broadband into our community. And I'm not trying to jump ahead of our problem, nor tie it in so much to the broadband problem, but our issue is, which we learned today, is the cost of us putting in conduit to accommodate a CMLP hookup for broadband. It's a cost that we don't know what that cost is going to be yet, but the electrician is going to go to work on that. And so I hear what Gail is saying, that I understand what you're saying, but I'm looking at the HOA part of it and saying, how much cost are we willing to absorb before we would be acceptable to something like 5G as an alternative? I don't know that answer. I'm just kind of putting it out there saying, do we want to absorb $20,000, $30,000 to prep ourselves for broadband? I don't know that answer. It's just one that we began to face today as we spoke to our electrician and about the cost of conduit here.
Thank you, David. Scott?
Yes, two comments. So I guess the one, first of all, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. My first comment is, I guess my understanding would be that what was voted on, the language of the warrant itself, not any supporting documentation, should have been or should be what is drives the charge to our committee. And so, maybe from what was written down viewpoint, that's what I would expect to have. As an engineer and as a person that has a deep interest in having broadband available to everyone in the town, I guess what I'd like to see us do is be able to look at all possible solutions with the understanding that wireless technology maybe was desirable to certain individuals, and be able to identify it, note it, maybe note that there's concerns about it. Maybe part of that commentary would actually include such things as, do there already exist a wireless grid that overlays all of the town, the lights, street lights? And by the way, over the air doesn't necessarily mean EMI. For example, I could do a point-to-point for several hundred feet with intense infrared laser or some other technology. So I would be in favor of removing that limitation, as our charter is really around recommendations, and we're not final authority in terms of making the decision. And it may be that those decisions, if they that we would are creating concerns for people because of electromagnetic radiation, then we would want to note those and maybe part of our public hearing. And that part of our report would simply call that out and make sure that that's clear to everyone, and if that's a consideration. And then, for example, another thing that into that is placement of cell towers within the town of Concord. There are a number of them there now. Is that a concern? How about high frequency noise from high tension power lines. But basically, I would definitely be in favor of removing the words, and then at the same time taking it into account in the report in our study, those concerns. I have a question. My question is, is this something where we would vote as a committee and then take that back to the select board?
Yes.
Yeah.
If we decide to request changes to our charge, I believe we should propose some specific changes in language and communicate that back to the select board in writing and give them an opportunity to
Sure.
either modify it or not. That would be the process.
Through the vehicle of a motion and a vote by us.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that last thing, Scott? I see your boxes came up, but I'm not hearing you. Okay. So if
I
you
think
can,
he asked if your committee should vote.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm back on. I've hit a dead spot. I just said, through the vehicle of a motion and a vote, we would then, as a committee, indicate the requested change back to the select board. That's the question.
yes, that's what we would do, and I think
Okay.
that in the interest of efficiency, both for our group and for the select board, if we want to entertain an agenda item about updating the charge, then I would suggest that we put that together, do a package, and maybe address anything and everything in the charge in one piece, so that we give them something fairly clean that they can then work with. Gordon, was that agreement or a desire to make another comment?
Yeah, both. If may I speak?
Sure.
Yeah, one other issue with the charge that we should probably address in this round is the committee size. And actually, if the committee is 7, okay, if it's 7, then we've got 5 attending, so we have a quorum. But if you have these oversized committees, then it's harder to get a quorum. And we want to get that right. But just backing up to this particular issue, what I'd like to do is remove those words. And Gail, look, I'm not trying, I didn't like those added. I didn't think that was proper. But let me assure you that this doesn't mean that your world is going to fall apart on this committee. Doesn't mean that automatically I'll be proposing solutions that you abhor. Doesn't mean that I need those words taken out and so that I can actually go and make sure that wireless solutions are inserted. It's absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm saying it just should be allowed. And if we leave those words in there, then we are vulnerable to, when we address town meeting, the complaint that our recommendations are invalid because we ruled out consideration of potentially beneficial alternatives. So we just want to have an open mind. It'll make for a stronger report. You don't have to worry about my using this as like, the thin edge of the wedge to get in and get wireless deployed all over town or anything like that. It just makes sense.
Okay, I didn't get a chance to actually comment on this particular point, so I'm gonna take my turn on that right now. I'm of the opinion that we have a lot of work to do in a very short period of time. If we focus primarily on fiber and fiber completion, and I think that I do agree with the somewhat overly broad conclusion to look at cases, but I do like the look at other solutions and propose them. But I actually think that we will do best if we focus on how far can we get the fiber and how can we get the fiber as far as possible. And then if there are remaining areas that seem to have no apparent solution from a fiber perspective, and so I'm sort of narrowing us to our fiber completion goal as the primary thing. Let's focus on how far we can get that done with that as the priority, and not worry, if we come to the conclusion that there are areas that can't actually be addressed with fiber, then that can be left for future, because I think town meeting was asking us to do that, and I do believe that there's a great opportunity. I would remind the committee that something like 20% of our population, of our residences, are not served by our current system, and I'm absolutely sure that most of those are potentially able to be served by fiber in the first place. And given that we're doing this in a short number of weeks, I'm inclined to do that. I'm also inclined not to work too much on the charge again until we've actually tried to flesh out how we're going to go about our work. And this is back to my first comment. If we do decide that we need to go back to the select board for updates to the charge, I'd rather do that from a position of having engaged a little bit more broadly across the whole spectrum of the work that we need to do, so that we don't find ourselves, 2 weeks after getting an update for this purpose, asking them for another update for some other purpose that we hadn't thought of because we spent our time working on the charge. In other words, I'd like to get started.
I have a follow-up comment.
Okay, Scott, I'll hear once more from each, and Gordon, you're going to get the last word because you already sort of have had a second spot. Go ahead, Andy. Scott.
So, Mark, I can see the merit of your argument, and one thing I think, just trying to think down the other path is, let's take the fiber as far as we can. And by the way, one thing that we're not really talking about, I do think some of the multi-tenant buildings will end up with a gateway to coaxial, which is neither wireless nor fiber. So I hope that isn't a constraint that as we go through this. But I can certainly see your argument of just starting from the good point of how can we get to fiber over the next month or so. And I think the source of that will be some of the detailed data, studying it, doing the Pareto analysis of what's the attribute of those unreachable homesteads or houses or households, and then based on that, understanding what could be done, meaning multi-tenant gateway to fiber. Concord Green figures out that they can do some underground work. All that information will come together, and I suspect we'll come back with a new percentage of unreachable, and then the question would become, maybe what you're suggesting is 4 or 6 weeks from now, we go to as part of our, we say we've reached an impasse and we still have 4%, and we can't reach, or 6%, whatever that number is, and we may consider asking to change the charge to be able to address that. I'm okay with waiting, I guess, in that regard. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you, Scott. David or Gail?
I think I like what you said, Mark, and I think you're right to kind of move forward. And if we find down the road we have to expand the charge, let's do it then.
Okay. Gail, anything?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what Scott said, take it as far as it can. I mean, that's the whole point of Article 41. You urge the town manager to complete the fiber network. And it seems to me like nothing is impossible. I mean, if you had millions of dollars, you could reach anywhere with the fiber. So, and maybe there's like a huge pot of money coming from Congress. They're talking about, massive amounts of money. I've been reading a lot about like rural communities are getting tons of money. Delaware just committed to getting fiber into every single home in the state. So it's possible, and I think we should, see what we can do, and then if we can't, or if we want to look at other solutions, then do that at the time we get to that decision point.
Anything more from you, Gordon, on this?
So I guess we don't need a vote because I'm
Well,
outnumbered here.
There's not a
There's
motion.
no motion and no second.
There's
Then it
not a
doesn't
motion
happen,
on the
right?
table, and I guess what I was saying is if we do, so I'm actually looking for consensus on the idea that we would recognize that there are at least two parts of the charge that are not ideal. This comment about what we can and should and should not study, and the mismatch between the actual size of the committee and the size on the charge. And those, I think we can note those and say that at some point we should go back to the select board and ask them to update the charge on both of those topics. And I would entertain, once we've got that written out, I would entertain that as an agenda item for a future meeting. I'm suggesting that we push a little bit further into the work at this point and start talking about the hows and the whys of what we're going to do, and mostly the how of what we're going to do and the when of what we're going to do, and set aside any further work on actually understanding or modifying the charge until we feel like we have laid out a work plan, know what we want to do, and if we really feel like there's something else, or maybe there won't be anything else to be added, then we address that at that time.
So
That's what I was looking
I
for.
agree. I agree with you, Mark. And unless someone makes the motion in the second, the next seconds here, then we can decide to move on, I guess.
I don't think you need a motion.
Yeah, and that's partially out of deference to the select board's time, and if we try to put the charge in front of them, and it's going to take them at least 2 weeks to really act on that. And meanwhile, we're kind of in abeyance. So I'm suggesting that we just kind of get to work on what we have in front of us, the core mission that I think we're all agreed on, which is really understanding what it's going to take to get fiber to as many people as is absolutely practical, and then document what else might need to be done from there. Okay. All right. Seeing no further discussion on that, and thank you, Terry, and don't apologize about that anymore. At least not to us. So, and I'm going to suggest that we move on to the main item for this meeting, which is a discussion of the work plan. And so I had just pulled out of the charge basically the three specifics and the one sort of more general areas of focus that were both in the article and in the charge. And my suggestion is that we might want to consider the methodologies, the solution development, and what might ultimately end up in a report. We also had, and just this is sort of a preview of the agenda, we also talked at the last meeting about the fact that public hearings would be potentially useful, and we can have a discussion about that as either one of the data collection methodologies or as a separate topic on when we get into scheduling. So maybe just in the taking these focus areas one at a time. Letter A, or the first one, is the last 5 to 7% of streets, and so I'll just introduce that by saying when the fiber optic system was originally constructed, the guidelines for that construction were to follow the electric system, and that construction meant overhead in overhead areas, underground through underground areas. But it did run into some problems with completion along certain streets. And I want to say, like Phillip Farm Road, for example, is an example of one of those streets. And those were streets where the electric system was underground, and there was either no conduit at all or no available conduit through which fiber could be passed, and the cost of installing additional fiber would have involved digging up the streets and going through a much more extensive construction process. And so in those areas, the fiber simply wasn't installed. And that's where this number 5 to 7% of streets comes. There's data from the GIS system that's available to query this, and we can very quickly from the IT department get a list of those streets. But generally speaking, it was a matter of construction cost. The thinking was that eventually, when it was time to update the electric utilities or the underground utilities in those street areas, at that point, fiber would be installed further. No cost has ever been developed that I'm aware of for what that work is. And I think there's been relatively limited progress made on those specific streets in the 6 or 7 years since that project has been finished. So that's just by way of introduction of what I take to that particular subject to mean. Any questions, clarifications, or comments on that from the committee?
I think since this is really critical to our work, I mean, should we have a spreadsheet that lists like every home or every street? I mean, it's probably every home that is in this situation, and then we can categorize them. I know Scott's talked a lot about that.
Yeah, I would like to volunteer to go work with Mark and the folks that are doing this GIS, Jill, I guess his name is, to gather up that data and parse it and bring it back to the committee in as raw form as possible, as well as any summary. I think that's a piece of work that I'd be happy to take on and try and move this forward.
Thank you, Scott. It is true that data is actually readily available from the town's GIS system. There is an available map that implies much of what we're already talking about. It's called the Broadband Availability Map and application. I can bring it up on the screen, but it identifies two basic things. It was derived from the construction diagrams as well as field data that's been collected since then by the technicians, and it's actually also relatively easy to export that into spreadsheet form. So I think that would be a fairly easy data request for the town to provide to us, and just I guess I could show the map if anybody wants to see it, but it's if you go to the town's website about broadband, which is concordma.gov/broadband, and click on the broadband availability tab along the left side, that does in fact show that.
Yeah, I see. It is an excellent map, and I have seen it personally. So.
Yeah, this is just briefly.
I didn't realize we could export data from it. And do you think that that map data is accurate relative to the actual GIS data?
It's actually directly provided. It's an export of the GIS system's data.
So it's well correlated, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So that's you can see I've got a section near downtown. This is the center of basically Lexington Road, Main Street, and Lowell Road, where they all come together. And you can see here's an example of Partridge Lane. This area that I'm highlighting is an example where the whole street is considered not available. And if memory serves, that's one of those places where the electric utility didn't have access to conduit in order to get at that street. So that's one, that would be an example of that. But I do think that it makes sense to both come up with a list, as Gail suggested, and potentially document that, if for no other reason than to make sure that as undergrounding is being done and considered, there's an opportunity for that, and then considering possible other solutions. That's going to drive a certain percentage of the unavailable folks. I know Gordon's would be familiar with this, but there is an undergrounding fund that the light board deals with and that the light plant deals with, which is designed to generate monies to eventually underground more and more of the system. I think one of the things that this committee could consider, and I'm sort of veering into the solutions development area, but we could also start to think about whether or not cash should be set aside from broadband operations to support further undergrounding. Most likely, this issue of dealing with streets where there simply isn't the facilities, that's the longest lead time portion of this particular effort. And those are the places that where you're talking about high costs. I think Gordon will correct me if I'm wrong, but Dave usually says $1 million a mile to underground the electric system, something like that.
That's correct.
That seems to be the so we're talking numbers on that order of magnitude. However, I would rush to say that that's true, but it's not. Partridge Lane's not a mile long, so is it doable, and what are the criteria, and how soon could we expect it to be done, and what are the ways to fund it, are all, I think, open for discussion in this group. Yes, Gordon.
So
Yes,
I have a quick
Mark.
question.
Just a second, Scott. Gordon speaking.
Yep.
The figure that's quoted, like you said, is $1 a mile. There are about 100 miles of streets in Concord, and about half of them are underground. So that puts the project timeline in the realm of around 50 years.
In terms of discussing areas that we might also understand a little bit more, and I know you had a comment, Scott, it has also occurred to me that it might be worth it to pull out the underground bylaw and actually look at it, just to make sure that we really have a clear understanding of what it prescribes and what it doesn't prescribe. Just in this context, I'm not aware of anybody ever actually sort of looking at that. And so, I heard Scott volunteering to get data regarding which streets these are from the GIS systems, and I will get us a copy of that bylaw. Just, I think for completeness, we should read it and try and make sure that we know how it speaks to fiber. Scott, you had a comment.
Yeah, it's kind of a follow-on to getting the raw data and sort of just, the first part of this is what I would call defining the problem. So the problem definition we have today is that there's 20 or 22% of the town is unserved or not served by the fiber. The next level would be understanding from the GIS and the fiber availability map and other data, what's the nature of those homes? Are they multi-tenant? Are they far away from that? Or are they on roads that don't have underground utilities? Or have underground utilities without provisions for optical? My question, and it's truly a question, is would we then look to survey those unserved homes and to see what percentage of them would be interested in actually having fiber. Is that something that we should consider as part of our work? I don't actually know the answer. I'm trying to understand what do we think on that front.
I'm afraid I missed a little bit of that question. I'm sorry. If somebody could.
So if once we know which houses are underserved or cannot get fiber today, and we think that's 22% of the households and 20%. Sorry, it's starting to rain really hard out here on 495. Would we want to survey those households to see what percentage of them would take fiber if it were available? Is that something that's in the scope of our work? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just curious. It seems like it would be interesting information, but I don't
Can I
know.
offer up a partial answer to that?
Sure.
The Concord Green Board has decided to survey our residents as to what the uptake would be if fiber were offered to the community. So we're designing a survey, and we'll love to have the input of the board, these board members, you all, as to what questions you might want to include. We want to make it short, but we're intrigued as to how many of our residents, if offered broadband, would actually sign up for it. And we're going to get that survey done within the next, I would say, month, and get it out to our residents.
That represents about 220 residents. If I remember
220 units,
Okay.
round numbers, 300 plus residents.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Because we have an investment, we obviously, separate from this committee, we have an investment to make. And we would like to rationalize any investment we have to make in preparation.
So it's sort of a parallel to what I'm asking. Again, the question is, do we want to do that for those and I don't know if that's really in our scope or not. I'm curious.
Gail might want to comment.
Sorry, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of thinking like you could survey people now, but then maybe in 5 years, someone else is living there, they might have a different opinion. I mean, I think that the goal, we've decided, and Pamela Dritt spoke to it really well at their last meeting, this is a public good. Like, we want everyone to be able to have it. So, from a practical, like, timing perspective and a money perspective, it might make a difference whether someone is ready right now. Oh yes, I promise I'll sign up, I'll subscribe. But it might not really matter.
In one way,
it's a different. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. You know what? It occurred to me. First of all, I think you're absolutely right. It's the longer greater good. Will all those households in the future have the value add of being able to add fiber if they chose to? So that I got that. The one thing that I could imagine a little later in our work where that would be valuable would be if we're making a recommendation to the town to do this fiber completion, and we've come up with a cost to do fiber. As Mark has pointed out, there's always some way to do it, and there'll be a cost associated with that. This might help the town understand what that part of the model might look like. In other words, okay, you've got, I'm trying to do the math here, 6,000 some odd households in Concord, if I remember correctly. So 20% will be 1,200 homes, and then 30% of them want fiber in the next 3 or 2 years or 1 year of big time. Then that's the kind of budget it's going to take to do this fiber extension. So it's not exactly part of our scope, except for at the end, I'm sure anyone reading this at the town level would want to know, well, okay, you've made this recommendation on how to reach this last 22%, and it's going to cost X amount of dollars per household for these harder to reach places. What's the total risk? How much do we have to authorize to make that happen? Kind of thing. So in that regard, I think it might be some good supporting information.
Gordon?
I don't think that we have time to run a survey, but I don't think we need one either. Okay. I think that the reason is that, okay, like, let's say we we actually succeed in building this out in 10 years, the people we survey, a good number of them won't even live here anymore. Some of them won't even be alive. So it's irrelevant actually to the question of how do we get from here to there. When we get there, then how many will want to buy it? That's, of interest, of course, in some sense, but it doesn't affect what the path is from here to there. Put another way, extending the fiber system isn't necessarily a matter of compelling everybody to get the service. It's just making it available. You don't need to survey anybody to know whether or not a neighborhood is underserved.
So there are three, just a minute, Scott. There are three, different focus areas that have already been defined. And then the last one, which is the task force may choose to explore additional issues that help to articulate the mission and business and financial policies for expanding the fiber network to sustain operations. And I think those are all important, and certainly understanding the demand pull that we have from customers and what makes them subscribe is quite useful to do. I think there are different ways to get at that information. We've rightly focused on the notion that cost is a big issue in these particular underground areas. They're going to be the toughest areas to get to. A financially solvent or broadband service which generates its own funds that it can use for capital projects is going to be able to build fiber faster to these places where the cost is high. And so we started originally with those places that were going to be relatively inexpensive. The marginal cost of extending into a home is the lowest. In fact, letter C, our fiber to the home and fiber to the business or last mile, is mostly about getting from the fiber that exists right now that supposedly serves a premise into that premise, and what are the barriers and what are the concerns that have come into that. That in many ways is the Concord Green problem today. This problem is a costly, it's interesting, it's a low volume of streets, and it's a high cost item, which unfortunately is going to tend to push it down the priority stack. But I think that the middle one, which is barriers to subscription growth, is to some extent the key to unlocking all of this, because if we can understand why don't we have more subscribers now, based on the fact that we already serve 80% of the town in theory, and yet only have about 15 or 20% of the market. If we actually had 30%, there would be a lot more free cash that would be available to go off and complete some of these projects or accelerate some of these other priorities around getting to places that are a little bit harder to reach. The broadband today is actually pretty profitable. I pulled up the fiber from the enterprise budget hearing last year, the page that talked about how much return the light plan is anticipating to get this year. It's $320 some odd $1,000 on a. I'll just share this briefly because I thought it was. So this is the. Can everybody see this telecom net income loss line? So this was presented at the enterprise budget hearing last May for the current year, and you can see the green line is the total revenue. The yellow line, the yellow bar is the expenses for a given year, and this is showing profitability and improving profitability. Actually, as the expenses go up, the profitability is going up even faster, and the results, the forecast plan was a net income of $323,000 on 1.579 million, which is about a 20% free cash return, which is so I think to some extent, our areas of recommendation could be what should be done with that? How much of that should be allocated in the direction of extending the fiber plant each and every year, for example? And part of it could be, as I was alluding to before, going to underground funding or solving the problems for these streets. There may be some of these streets that are, projects on the order of 100,000 or 250,000 or even $500,000. With a growing system, some of those projects become affordable. So, just to pull something out because I happen to be on the screen, Partridge Lane, how much does that cost? Maybe that gets fiber conduit at some point. And what are the solutions for how to do that conduit? Does every conduit really require digging up the whole street, or is there something else that can be done to put fiber in, going along the edge or using a small cut? Are all solutions we could be looking at in those areas.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. It's on the technical front, Mark. If you're burying something that has no electrical wires at all, not even low voltage like a telephone line, what are the requirements? Can you bury it 2 or 3 feet down and along the edge of the road? Is that a solution? So it's interesting. First things first, let's get the problem understood, which is the piece I'll work on.
Okay. Gordon?
Yeah, why, Mark, and I don't know, maybe Scott too, but why does anybody think bringing service to a multi-dweller condo or facility, well, why is that so expensive? Because in some sense, the last mile from the street to the apartment complex, however expensive that is amortized over a potentially large number of subscribers that you open up as soon as you've connected to the building. So why is that so expensive? And I think it's because of the expense that category of customers underserved.
Do you want to answer that, Mark? Or do you want me to talk to it?
I'll take a shot at it, Scott. So every multi-dwelling environment tends to be at least a little bit different from the others. But some of the things that we've encountered is that retrofitting or adding additional inside wiring, if you're talking about an apartment building kind of situation, can be a little bit costly, and you run into some of the same things that you run in outside. Is there an available way, path for that wire? And do you wire everybody or just the people that want it? At some level, it's a little less expensive to go right through a building and add it to every unit, but if you only get a small number of subscribers, you can do that. There isn't that small number of subscribers can not be much of a return. And then there's a question of ownership. And so far, I think this is one that we probably need to look at, is to what extent does the light plant actually own or turn over to a property owner some construction that's being done on their private property. So once you kind of go past that demarc of I brought fiber to your parcel, then everything that's on the other side of that is typically owned by the property owner, and then you get into a question of who pays for it, which is the Concord Green question, as well as the technical issues of how do you actually provide for it. In many cases too, in multi-dwelling unit situations, the coax is often installed by the private cable company or telecommunications company that did that, and they in fact get agreements from for exclusive use of that. So you can't necessarily just get to one closet and then connect to the coaxial cable that another provider already put in, unless that cable was actually installed and is owned by the building owner. So there's some complexities in there. They're solvable usually, but it does tend to be one project at a time. And I see David nodding his head, and this is actually the exact same problem that's coming up with electric vehicles and charging stations when we go into multi-dwelling units. Is how do you get some kind of facility in there because to charge vehicles is basically the same question as how far into somebody's property can you go when it's one of these jointly owned things.
If I can add one more thing, Mark,
Sure.
Comcast wired us, but they just wrote us a check for $27,500 last year, not to be the exclusive provider, but they have the exclusive rights to put advertising in our main office, which they don't do.
Yeah.
Should they choose to put a pamphlet there, they're the only ones who could put pamphlets of advertising of the services in our main office.
That's very interesting. Gordon.
Well, so
Hey, but-
my
They do
son,
it based on door counts.
and, I'm sorry, what did you say, David?
They do it based on door counts, how many doors we have.
Oh boy.
They do a multiplication factor and they just write a check.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Well, I don't think we're going to be doing that.
We don't expect you to.
That's
Mm.
okay. Yeah, my son and daughter-in-law live in one of those brand new apartment buildings in Assembly Square, and they get their internet service through a wireless link.
Mm-hmm.
So look, I'm not an expert in this, but and not to just raise the topic that we just disposed of a second ago, okay? But what I'm saying here is that that's an existence proof to me that wireless can actually serve as that final link in an apartment setting. And to launch this project, understanding that there's no consideration for such a solution, I think undermines the integrity of our recommendations. But anyway, well, what I'm proposing specifically would be that Concord would bring a wireless node to Concord Green, not lay down wires to anybody's apartments, but then there would be a corresponding wireless link in the apartments that choose that service.
May I ask a question about wireless, which I don't understand? I would suspect that many of our residents, the majority of our residents, have wireless within their apartments. It seems to me that's the way we're all going. Is there assuming that there is danger in 5G, and I don't know that there is or isn't, is there a difference of danger between 5G wireless that you may be suggesting and the 5G that we currently have within our condos that you're aware of?
I'm going to say that Gail may want to comment on this, but I think we are getting a little far afield.
Okay.
But
I just want okay.
Do you want to make a comment, Gail?
Yeah, just my understanding is, we may have routers. Well, I mean, most people have routers. They have radios attached, and those signals are less strong typically than signals or than wireless. I don't know, nodes, networks, the things that Gordon was referring to that are intended to go to more people, because those have to be powerful enough to go through concrete walls and things like that. So the things that people have inside their homes are less powerful, and
okay, got it.
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
There are
different frequencies and different power levels.
Okay.
There are definitely differences in power levels, and there are certainly implementations in certain multi-dwelling units of wireless distribution. There are, as Scott alluded to earlier, there are technologies to use phone lines as well as coaxial cable for apartments that have that, or Ethernet is an excellent solution. and is available in some places, as well as fiber. And they are getting to be, I will say that speaking to fiber specifically, the various solutions for inside wiring, at lower cost and with higher flexibility along fiber have been really improving quite quickly. There are some very interesting products, that can be bent, that can be essentially taped to the wall. So there are a lot of really smart ways to do fiber now that tend to do that, and I'll sound like a broken record. You'll probably hear this from me a lot of time, but fiber continues to be very future proof. One of the things that we recognize both indoors and outdoors is that anything that needs to do wireless needs some kind of power source, because it has to be electrified. And that is a cost and something that's going to need to be replaced on a fairly regular basis. So the useful life of a wireless transmitter, 3 to 5 years in a commercial setting, and then you're replacing it, so you're buying it over and over again. So it has this, like a lot of things, there's this sort of, it seems like it has a lower cost of entry, but if you then take a look at it over the 20-year lifespan, you've replaced the wireless facility 4 times, and that same piece of fiber is carrying all your data still. And so, when we think about the long-term cost of ownership, and thank goodness for the light plant, we're in it for the long haul. There are good reasons why we like the fiber a lot, from a long-term, from a maintenance and operating cost perspective.
By the way, just a quick commentary. One of the other avenues we investigated back when Mark and I did the original study to solve this last 200 feet to 500 feet problem was actually on the power lines themselves. And there's technology being done that superimposes the radio frequency on top of the power. Last I looked, that technology still wasn't mature and stable enough to be useful, but we looked around at a lot of different solutions along the way.
For those of you who did attend the advanced metering infrastructure presentation yesterday, and I recommend anybody that didn't go ahead and look for that recording when it comes up line. The home area network controls portion of it actually alluded to the use of signaling across the electric wires themselves for controlling devices inside a subscriber's home. So that Scott's right. That's a potentially practical solution. Not as practical in the multi-dwelling context that we were talking about, because you get into filtering issues and things like that, but still potentially useful in some applications. There's just a lot of solutions out there. Okay.
I just wanted to footnote that there are a lot of solutions, but I think we've seen, and I saw this from the AMI talk yesterday, that fiber is really the best tool for these things. Anyway, so that's what we're here to talk about is fiber. So
the closer we get to fiber, the better. So really, what I was aiming for today, and again, I think I probably didn't announce that today, but I'm always aiming for 90 minutes because I turn into a pumpkin after more than 90 minutes on Zoom. So we'll plan to wrap up by about 8 o'clock. What I was hoping we would get to is a little bit more of a discussion of each of these three areas, and then talk about some data requests that we're looking for. And so far I've heard a need for the GIS system data to identify streets and also parcels and addresses that are not currently served. I had volunteered to try to run down the underground bylaw just as a way of looking at it. I think that the question about surveys is sort of a good one. What other data do we think we might want to get, and where should we get it from? I think the first two are pretty obvious where they come from. Gordon.
So I think
Sorry,
when
Scott,
I asked the question about the
Gordon.
survey, I asked the question about survey. I believe that our consensus was maybe not at this time. So since we're trying to limit the scope of work, I'm okay with, I truly asked that question because I didn't know. I'm okay with at least this moment to set that aside. Maybe if there's time a little later, we can consider it. The first part, to me, so the first part is the GIS data and of course the underground piece begins to frame the problem, and so we can begin to categorize what are the reasons those houses are underserved. And then at that point, do we start thinking about solutions for each of those maybe we can bid them into different classes, and then then start to think about how those could be addressed. I mean, there's some other, one thing that may be useful would be to collect the tools that we might use. And one example I will give, something I heard about, and I know Mark knows more about, is sort of a property improvement investment model where, let's say someone wants to have fiber or wants to make some sort of investment, but the way that the mechanism works is that that investment is made on their behalf, and it's baked into their property taxes over the next 10 years. Mark, can you talk a little bit? Let me not, without getting into the details, should we collect all those possible solutions, if you will, tools, as we're collecting the data on the problem side, so that when we're ready to start putting solutions to this, we have a list of potential solutions, like the funding from the federal government, like, can we pull wires to the trees? I mean, that was a question I was kind of thinking about as well. So maybe that's a trend we might want to start on.
Yeah, so you're referring to the notion of whether or not anything around, say, conduit installation or fiber installation could be rolled into, it's a municipal process called betterment, and it's typically used for
Right.
sewer systems and water systems. So the concept being, you're extending the sewer system through to a bunch of new area of town, and then these service lines need to be brought to homes, and that can be funded by the town and then recouped from the property owner via betterment charges, which show up on their property tax bills. And that's one way to create an easier way for a property owner to do that. Your line's creating a lot of noise, so I'm going to suggest you mute if you can.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay.
I'll mute.
I just wanted to follow up on that. I think that's a great idea to start collecting these sort of tools for getting the job done. And I think there's also something called, I think it's called PACE, which is for like clean energy investments, which I've seen talked about for, I don't know, if you want to put a battery system in or solar or something, and if there's some kind of mechanism for doing that. I don't know if Concord's doing it, but I've seen it in that. Anyway, but yeah, that's a good,
Gordon?
great idea.
Yeah, Gail, I've heard of PACE. We discussed it when I was on CSEC as maybe a means of making heat pumps and that sort of thing more affordable.
Okay.
In the years since, because it's already been a while, I've actually heard some pretty bad things about PACE. In that homeowners maybe wouldn't be so much of a problem in our affluent town, but that homeowners can get in over their head with it. So sure, add it to the list. Just circling back to the subject of surveys, and Scott, I didn't mean to just shoot the idea down off of hand. It's just that in the context of a 6-month turnaround, we may not have the time to design, mount, interpret, and report on it on a survey. But there are certainly issues that I'm interested in, that an approach like surveying or maybe something similar would be useful. And what I'm thinking about is, okay, the light plant has a queue of a backlog of people that have asked to install and that are not being served. That queue is too long right now. It's basically because of COVID. But that one number, the depth of the queue, doesn't tell you everything I would like to know about in what sense are Concord residents underserved. You know, we've mentioned already homeowners associations or you know, multi-dweller facilities. But also, you know, maybe there's other things we're missing here. We mentioned business, but, you know, could there possibly be affordable housing issues? Could there be, and I think I mentioned this last meeting, you know, that the schools have been doing remote learning, right? Does every student in Concord Public Schools and the high school have access to the bandwidth that they need in order to be learning effectively? And that doesn't show up in a queue. It's just a deficit. It's a need that's really being underserved and should really, in some sense, get prioritized as we try to reach, quote, you know, full deployment. They should happen first.
Yeah, I have two comments. First of all, I didn't feel shut down. It was literally a question, quite literally, and I didn't know, and I think I'm okay. The other thing I would mention, just because I happen to know about it, is that Comcast has a thing called Internet Essentials, and if you Google Comcast Internet Essentials, they'll deliver 50 for those that are in that underserved, underpaid, you know, low income. Basically, if you're on SNAP or you meet the circuit breaker requirements or some other things of that nature you have to apply to their program, you get 50 megabits for $10 a month. Yeah, I don't know if we're going to be able to beat that.
Well, so I just wanted to add, Vince Carlson, anyway, he has done a lot of research on that and shared that with, I think, some people at the light plant, that there is a federal program that Concord could be taking advantage of. I actually emailed the light plant about it in January. And so Concord could be taking advantage of that. And it allows like the internet provider to be reimbursed by the federal government for folks that Scott mentioned. So there are those things. And I think that's also something we should add to our toolbox list of recommendations.
Yeah, I'm going to put that one under the category of sort of barriers to subscriber growth. I think that fits mostly in that area, because what it is suggesting is ways to approach increasing the subscriber base for the service, either for their benefit or for the benefit of the service in general.
I'll be happy to, you know, either discuss it or send you all an email on, you know, both of the programs.
Thank you for volunteering that, Vince. I think that would be useful if you wouldn't mind. If you send it to me, I will distribute it to the committee.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you. So let's we're at about 10 minutes to 8, and I want to be respectful of people's time, but I do want to. So I think that we're going to have to continue the discussion about the focus areas and the data collection, and I'm happy to collect suggestions for data to be collected into a list, and then I think what we're going to be headed for is, you know, some letters or some information requests to various entities. Probably most of them are going to go to CMLP, but I, you know, out of respect for their workloads, I would like to kind of put that in one package and say, you know, please give us these things, and then give them an opportunity to respond rather than sort of dribs and drabs. So if we could maybe target having that finalized by next week so that we can ask. I also think that public input is very important, and at the last meeting we talked a little bit about the notion of having some public hearings, and so I'd like to get your thoughts about whether we should schedule some public hearings. We're required to have at least one where we talk about the results of the work we're doing. I'm thinking that we may want to have an earlier one where we actually ask the community to tell us what they think the needs in fact are around fiber completion, because I think that would be, I would be interested in that. I'm wondering whether others agree.
Yeah, I'd also like to talk to the people who have not signed up and it's available to them. Because if I may say very rapidly, and I forget the numbers, Mark, you gave, but there's a reason people aren't signing up when it's available. And as I remember, the numbers were very low in terms of switching. And you have to give reason, or this is off our topic, but people haven't grabbed on the reason to switch, whether it's switching costs, whether it's learning curve, whatever it may be. I've been intrigued why people haven't switched, and I would love to talk to people who haven't switched, who are capable of switching.
Okay,
Okay.
good point. Gordon?
As far, well, David, I think that's a great question. And an example would be, hey, if you're a Comcast customer and you've been using a Comcast email domain, you might not ever want to switch unless you can carry that with you. I don't know if you can or not.
You can,
No,
you can actually.
Yeah, well,
I'm in
that's
that
good.
category.
And likewise
great.
for Verizon's DSL, just so you know. I used to have
Okay,
DSL.
good. All
and I
right.
still have my
So,
we
well,
still have
and
it.
maybe people don't know that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we're Comcast customers ourselves, but we watch a lot of TV. So
Yeah.
it would be kind of belts and suspenders for us. Okay.
Yep.
As far as the hearing goes, I kind of see I would recommend, Mark, my preference would be to develop a little bit something closer to what's going to be our actual work product. And to me, I mean, we're working on this now, but I envision something like, okay, town, if you have your heart set on getting to completion, various definitions of that, there's not one definition. It's going to cost, this definition is going to cost you this much, this definition is going to cost you that much, and so forth. And then maybe against that, some of the benefits that you get as you climb that value ladder.
Okay.
And that's where having a hearing would let people, give them something concrete to hang their hat on, because we're not necessarily offering the world here. We're already filtering out certain possibilities like wireless. No, but seriously, we're not offering the world here, and we'll give them a menu to consider and opine on.
That's a good point. Gail, do you have an opinion about hearings?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to hear from people because they might have some good ideas, you know, and they might have said things, they might have ideas that we haven't thought of yet. So I think we want to make sure we include those. And I like what Gordon just said, you know, to have some data to share, and not just, I really don't like the meetings where like, oh, let's come and let's talk about it, let's hear from people like that. I just, you know, I can talk to people I want to talk to people. I don't need to go to a hearing to do that. I think that's kind of, I don't know. So it's nice to have some data to share with people, and maybe some thoughts, some options that we've been considering before we actually have the hearing or the meeting.
David?
I agree.
Yeah, I'm thinking something along the lines of maybe at about a third of the way through, when we've gathered enough information to be able to articulate the size and scope of the problem, but haven't necessarily settled on here are all the answers. And you know, something I did appreciate the way that, you know, the CMLP handled the hearing yesterday. I thought that, you know, 20 minutes of information from the group, followed by an opportunity for people to tell you what they think. I think we agreed that we were going to meet weekly on Thursdays, so I'm going to try and push this onto the calendar regularly for the next several Thursdays, so that, you know, we'll have an opportunity for people to find out about where they can come and let us know in each of our meetings what they've got in mind as well. Okay. I didn't want to get through this meeting without at least touching on that topic.
Oh, just, Mark, I had one other thing that, in contrast to a hearing,
Yeah.
the public is welcome here.
Yes.
And you see, these meetings are structured also. So you have a nice mix that they can participate as the decisions are being made and contemplated, and the information is being, anyway, so you got both.
Great.
And you know, we could ask the light plant to publicize the meeting for us, for instance. Okay.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. And sort of by way of that, there are two efforts. So I did watch the recording of the chair's breakfast. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the fact that all of the committee chairs get together once a month and sort of walk through efforts that they're going. There are two things that I think we should be aware of and maybe plan to get connected to. One of them is the Finance Committee in, I believe it's November, is going to be talking about the 10-year capital plan. And obviously fiber construction on the timescales and scope that we're talking about is capital for the town. And I think it makes sense for us to overtly coordinate with the Finance Committee about where these types of capital investments might fit into the program and what recommendations we might want to be making for telecommunications to be a more regular part of that town capital allocation process. There was a very good piece of work done, I believe it was for the townwide capital planning committee. I forgot exactly what they were called, but this spring that recommended a sort of more global approach to capital investment, and I think we want to connect to that. And likewise, the long-term plan update, the Envision Concord plan, is also being reviewed and being updated. And I personally was disappointed that in the last version, in the fact that I thought it said relatively little about the economic vitality and resilience and sustainability benefits of advanced communications and what having a fiber network could do for the town. And so I would like us to plan to coordinate with that group and make sure that they start to think about the telecommunications utility in those contexts of how does it support sustainability goals and how does it support economic vitality, because I think it's a very important element to what the town has to offer. And so those are two areas of outreach, I guess I'd call it, that also could be ways to sort of get a little bit more public input and have some processes inform what we're talking about here. Okay. With that, I see that it's a couple of minutes to 8. So are there any agenda topics that you guys were thinking about that you wanted me to specifically discuss at the very next meeting? Because if there is, I would like to hear them so that I can note them for the agenda that I built for next week. And if not, we'll take some public comments. Does anyone wish to?
Actually, sorry, one thing. Did we pick a clerk for this meeting?
Yeah,
Yeah.
David Hessel.
Oh, we did. Okay, thanks. I
Hey,
missed
but
that.
Gail,
Sorry.
Gail, if you've been taking notes, would you share them? Because I'm not the
Yeah, I'd
best.
be happy to.
I'm not the best recurring.
One of the nice things about Zoom recordings, of course, is that within a couple of days, and as soon as we get the link, I did share something, I think it's in the agenda even. If you're not subscribed to Minuteman Media Network on YouTube, go to that and you can see all the committee meetings pretty much coming up within a couple of days of when they occur. And that's a great way to go back and do the notes.
Yeah, I've been taking notes, but occasionally I've been listening and realized I should have been writing.
It's very hard, which is one of the reasons why I appreciate everybody taking a turn, because I know it's a lot of work.
If you have anything to share, Gail, just email it to me, please.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Comments? Vince?
It's a very timely topic that you just mentioned, which was taking committee notes. Because I think it was about the middle of the afternoon, so I didn't expect you to pick it up in this meeting. But I sent you and Gail a memo, and I apologize, by the way, because I just grabbed, the whole committee mailing list. And so, copies, I think, went out to everybody, so you may see it in your email. But anyway, I'm the clerk of the PEG Access Advisory Committee for this year, and I actually, volunteered for it, although it's my least favorite position. But I did it in order to test some automated minutes keeping tools. And you'll see a discussion of that, in the document that I circulated. And this goes back to when YouTube actually started first providing subtitles, which is back in 2017 or 2018. So this has actually been an ongoing project of MMN, which of course back then was still CCTV, as Mark knows. But anyway, the technology has improved very substantially. So I'm experimenting for PEG Access Advisory Committee with a software service called Otter, OTTER, as in the mammal, AI. And typically, the clerk during the meeting doesn't have to do anything. As a matter of fact, the preferred way to use it is to pick it up when YouTube has generated the subtitles for the meeting. And then Otter AI can go to work on that, and it gives you a kind of an interactive interface so that you can see what took place during the important parts of the meeting, record those, and that's probably all that's necessary. You can take very exhaustive minutes, or you can make things only a few paragraphs long. And actually, in most cases, there's never going to be a need, for a full transcript, a text transcript of the whole meeting. So the experimentation, that really would be helpful if some other committees are doing this, in addition to what I'm doing, with the PEG Access Advisory Committee. And because you're doing this rotating clerk thing, it may be the ideal, situation for you. So take a look at, what I've sent, and,
Okay.
maybe it's something that you can discuss again at the next meeting.
All right. Thanks for your comment.
I'm very interested in that
Okay.
because I'm the clerk on the light board.
I'll make sure that it gets distributed. Anyone else? Pamela?
Thank you. You guys are inspiring. A couple of quick questions for technical ignorance. Does the fiber go in the existing electrical conduit? No,
No.
it has separate conduit. Is all the fiber buried?
No.
So some of it is going from telephone pole to telephone pole?
Yes.
So thanks for the suggesting that we get information about where the underground wiring is. Mark, that will be helpful too, because how many communities have underground wiring buried naked without conduit, like Concord Green does, which will also need replacement in the future.
Mhm.
Can't we piggyback on all repaving in neighborhoods which have no conduit to lay conduit for both fiber and upgraded electrical service? I think the town is doing that, aren't we?
Yes, it's a matter of how many centuries do you want to wait?
I see. None. We need to invest in this now. To prepare for the climate crisis, to segue, increasingly homes are going to be built all electric and older homes retrofitted to be all electric, increasing the need for improved electric service and more conduit build out. So can we make sure to include fiber expansion with every such update as an investment in the town infrastructure itself, like water and sewer and electric service? I think I understand why so many people aren't buying the town broadband. And there are many people who wouldn't pay separately for broadband and TV, for instance, who are not technically savvy and see no reason to do any change, to make any change. However, more and more people are going to learn the real benefits of the fiber connection for that the adoption of that, like the adoption of electric vehicles, is going to go up, I think, over time. So I think we really do need to be proactive. I think we should think of the build out of this not as a town expense, but as a town investment in our infrastructure and in preparing for the climate change that is already here.
Thank you, Pamela. Do I have any other members of the public that would like to comment? If so, you can come off mute or just raise your hand. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's time. I think we will continue to work on what the data requests are. I will take the input that we've discussed today and formulate a specific list and begin to draft one or more letters that we will review at next week's meeting. That will constitute formal requests from this committee for data. I would assume that in some cases we might also like to invite some of the staff members to, it might be appropriate to have some staff plan to describe that from us to us, but we'll have to get into a negotiation about how long it will take to get that data. Ideally, I have an expectation that GIS data may be pretty fast because it was something that was used on a day-to-day basis when I was operating there. So we should be able to begin looking at that fairly promptly, and we'll review it as it comes in. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we take a motion to adjourn? Before we take a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
I
Second.
second.
Thank you. Also, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your attention, and I'm still.
Need a roll call.
Excuse me, Gordon.
Need a roll call for remote meetings. You need a roll call.
Roll call vote. Okay, thank you. David, as clerk, would you take a roll call?
Pamela, I'm sorry. Ow, hold on for a second. My back just went bad. Gail?
Yes.
Sorry, guys. God.
If you're,
We can't end the meeting, he's fine.
I just moved the wrong way. Mark?
yes.
Gordon?
Yes.
And who am I missing?
God.
Scott and Mark.
God, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
I
And
think that
yourself.
carries it, and I'm in favor of it also.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good
Good night.
Good night.